It's Georgia Reed from Cybercrime magazine. I'm super excited to be talking with Tracey Pretorius today. She is not only a woman in cyber, but the director of Global Partner Business Strategy and the thought leader at Microsoft. Welcome, Tracey, to the studio.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are excited to have you here. So you call yourself a partner-driven, customer-oriented and obsessed cybersecurity cloud strategy crisis expert, and you're a globe-trotting speaker. So just tell our audience a little bit about how you fell into tech as a career and what you're doing at Microsoft today.
Well, I actually was born and raised in South Africa, and I studied industrial psychology and communications and joined Microsoft in South Africa after apartheid had lifted and a whole lot of big multinational companies came back into the country. And so I fell into tech, for lack of a better word, and then did a number of roles within the South African subsidiary and then moved to our UK subsidiary after that. And in 2005 moved to our headquarters in Redmond in the US. And along my career within Microsoft, I had various roles that touched on security, whether it was product security, whether it was launches, whether it was consumer security, whether it was commercial security issues. And cybersecurity is something that I stumbled across in 2012 when I took on an incident response crisis communications role. And I fell in love with it. So it was a non-traditional entry into the space.
So I can say that, many of the women I speak to, some of them who are in cybersecurity fell into it in a non-traditional way, and some came, through the government or through the NSA or something like that. So as a woman in cyber, what are some of the initiatives you're driving right now to get more women noticed and more interested in this in a non-traditional route?
Well, I think it's creating awareness, and it's pretty apt given that it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's awareness for women in the security space that it's not just the traditional engineering roles that you have to pursue if you wish to follow a career in cybersecurity. There are other skill sets that are valuable and that are needed. And so I think there are a couple of things that I'm trying to do. In May of this year, I co-founded and I now chair the Microsoft Women in Security community. And we created this community. It's about 200 strong internally at Microsoft. It's not just for women, it's also for our male colleagues, because we do believe we can learn a lot of valuable things from what they're doing in the industry. But it's actually bringing people together to share best practices, what's worked for your career, and to help each other actually advance. And I think speaking, opportunities like this as well, just in the industry, and just really helping others understand what skills are required in cybersecurity today. And it's not all just technology skills. There are a lot of valuable skills, like communication is critical, especially during time of incident or response. The board needs to be communicated to and kept up to date on stuff, and how you do that effectively and meaningfully is huge. And I think the industrial psychology piece is a huge foundation. The human factor that plays out in cybersecurity today is something that grounding, certainly in my background, has proved to be valuable. And so I help highlight that it's not just this historical traditional route that everybody thinks you have to follow, a computer science degree and enter into the workspace and start coding.
Well, yeah, you yourself, you have the industrial psychology and data communications background. Correct. And you're an amazing communicator, and you've done quite a bit to set up communication strategies within Microsoft itself. Yes. So what are you doing with that now that you've had this tried and true and tested communication strategy set up? How are you helping others as a thought leader when it comes to this? Because there is a huge communication gap.
Absolutely. So one of the things I focused on, as you rightly point out, was actually getting our own house in order when I started in this space in 2012. And then I suddenly realized that in the process of securing our brand and ensuring that we were communicating effectively internally during times of crisis ourselves, was to think about how could we actually help our customers and our partners? Because at the end of the day, securing their brands is also incredibly helpful. And we have a lot of best practices and things that we've learned, and so why would we not share that? And so currently my role now is working with partners and customers and actually helping them understand some of the things that we've learned, some of the best practices and some of the pitfalls that we've gone through, so that they don't have to necessarily go through those. And the response has been great. Working with some CISOs, I'm actually meeting with some CISOs next week to go through an exercise, an IR exercise, and they're all from private and public sector, but they're coming together to learn from each other too. So it's creating a sense of community. It's not just me conducting that orchestra to get them discussing it. It's actually them also learning from each other and understanding that in many cases they're all dealing with the same problem.
So what are some of the biggest challenges for the CISOs that you're talking to when it comes to this, when it comes to IR communication?
Well, I think one of the challenges is just ensuring that when something does happen, which unfortunately is inevitable in most cases nowadays, that they truly are prepared and that they do actually have the rest of the C-suite fully bought into what that process actually is. It's also having some clear set of principles in place prior to any crisis happening. One of the hardest things is during the time of crisis to try and build a set of principles and to get buy-in on those set of principles, even more importantly. And so I'm certainly seeing from CISOs that they are very well versed in their own process and in their own practice, but are not practicing it enough necessarily across the organization so that it's ingrained in the organization's DNA, and so that it can actually just be part of business as normal, as opposed to it has to be a crisis every single time there's a cybersecurity incident.
So instead of emails getting clogged up with people panicking, there's a plan in place. And do you help set that up? Do you give examples, concrete examples of a good chain of action to follow?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've tried different methods ourselves and have certainly learned what's more effective. And so we share that. At the end of the day, each organization is going to be unique and going to have to do what works for them. But I think there is a way in which a lot of this can actually be templatized. And there's a lot of preventative stuff that can be done up front. And a lot of preparedness, so that when you are actually executing in time of crisis, you are actually just simply going through a process that everybody's expecting, and there are no surprises. I actually picked up some best practice myself from the local fire department, who I think are really well versed in this. They have a process in place. They do not teach someone to hold the fire hose when it's their first time holding it in the middle of a fire that has to be put out. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit the same with cyber. People should not have to feel that this is the first time they're holding the fire hose and be surprised during the process, because you can in cyber be surprised. And so managing those surprises when they come up versus the whole thing being a surprise is a much better experience all around.
Have you ever witnessed or experienced anyone who's over-prepared for a crisis and that's actually been a handicap for them?
I have. I think there are organizations that have timed when they're going to release publicly that they've had a cybersecurity incident, and they have over-functioned in some ways, for lack of a better word, because they've been very conscious that they have to then be able to help consumers or help their customers deal with what they're about to hear. And I think then that actually takes away some of the trust in the whole process, because people are like, well, why didn't you tell us about this sooner? Because clearly you knew about this sooner if you were so well established in your response. So I think one can never be over-prepared in what you're going to do. You just have to think about how you execute on that preparedness as well.
And you said the word trust, and I was wondering
Yes.
if you could speak to that a little bit about how teams can learn to trust one another when it comes to incident response or just preparing for it.
Absolutely. Trust is key. Trust is key not just for the audience of customers that we're serving, but it's also key internally. I think when I look around the community that I have, certainly internally at Microsoft and in the industry, I think the whole security industry has grown up actually very much on relationships. And so I've certainly learned that relationships is key. Mm-hmm. And making sure that you can actually build those relationships outside of the time of incident crisis, because then during the crisis, it's much easier to actually to leverage that relationship with an established relationship in place and some trust. It's very hard in the middle of a crisis to try and build a relationship and then ask for something or ask for forgiveness, depending on what's been asked for. And sharing is not necessarily caring in this industry. People don't like to share stuff. They share on a needs-to-know basis. And if there's trust, they can actually certainly help the communicators and the IR folk execute more effectively if they share some stuff, but they won't always naturally share that. You have to know how to ask the right questions to get the right information.
So do you do any kind of team building exercises at a corporate level, or do you just think it's really about building relationships even outside of different companies and becoming just a team of like the good guys? I mean, I kind of am picturing, in a cop show when the two detectives go get a beer after work and they're like, whew, and then they talk like normal human beings. Because at the end of the day, the person behind the keyboard is a human being, you're a human being, CEO is a human being. So what are some of the best trust building experiences that you've come across?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's on the job trust building, and then you're absolutely right, it's outside of the job trust building too. You will make mistakes, you will do things that people don't agree with or don't like during time of crisis, because you are going to be executing based on something that you know to be tried and tested.
Sure.
And so I think what I've certainly experienced is that people value and respect when they can understand what you're doing, and so helping people understand why, the strategy behind why you're doing something the way you're doing it is critical. There's certainly value in the exercises and practicing, because then everybody's going through that fire drill and is in it but feels safe because they know it's not real. So you can build, you can see potentially where you're going to fail, as opposed to when you're in the moment and people are not wanting to fail. So certainly exercise, but also, yes, just some of that social, keeping in touch and actually helping each other in the industry, thinking about what they might be interested in, an article of interest, or they may have mentioned something, keeping an eye out for what you know they might be interested in, showing curiosity for their space too. It really is actually about genuine curiosity and interest.
I want to get back to talk to you about that in a second, but one of the things when we were meeting earlier, you mentioned that you've kind of become to understand the criminal mind in action, not just from where you grew up, but also through your career. What can you tell me about the criminal mind? I mean, you do have a psychology background.
Well, I think what ends up happening is you realize that there's some generalizations that you can make based on some activity that you're seeing. And I think that's helpful in incident response, because it helps you do scenario-based planning then. And it also helps you communicate in a scenario-based way, which then streamlines the way in which you're working, which makes it more effective. And it helps you then not reinvent the wheel. Now, I do appreciate that that means that there's some generalizations that will take place. But certainly when you're working with customers or we're dealing with our own incidents, if we're aware of who the nation state attacker is, there's some generalizations based on some history of patterns that we can pick up. And those patterns is always when the industrial psychology piece comes in, which is always useful. And that then helps you know in some way what you can potentially expect. And that takes a bit of the surprise out of it.
Gotcha.
And I think helping customers think about that during incident response, of take a step back and see if there's anything that you can see here, a trend. What else is happening? Who else is experiencing this? But the potential why behind it and what those implications are can also help you prepare for that end result. So in many cases, we know that there isn't a need for media attention. And in that case, you don't necessarily need to be overly concerned about that. On the other hand, we have seen patterns where we know that there is a need for media attention, and therefore you have to fast track your preparedness in that space, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
So for the crises that do end up with some media attention,
yes,
you know, with a big company or a hack or a data breach or something like that, do you think that the media is fairly portraying what's going on? Or is this partly due to miscommunications from the company that had the breach when they're speaking to the press, or what words they say? I mean, what kind of communications can better represent the issue at hand?
I think what's particularly hard is that good news doesn't sell.
Yeah.
And so the over sensationalization of some of the stuff really causes pain, not only for the average reader who doesn't necessarily understand what's happening, but also for the company who then is trying to educate at the same time that they're trying to communicate what's happening. This is a space that is not well understood, and it's not a one-word, two-word answer necessarily. And so I think that there are some media that do a very good job of portraying stuff as accurately as possible, but there is also still an element of sensationalization and overhype in some cases.
Do you deal with that at all when you're meeting or consulting with CEOs or CISOs?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, I've got a couple of Traceyisms that I'm known for, and one of them is words have meaning. You know,
Gotcha.
Choose your words carefully, because it really does impact your business, the way you actually communicate during a time of a breach or a compromise. And so I think that understanding was a bit of a wake-up call for many of the customers that I've been speaking to and the partners that I've been working with.
So you help with the internal communications as well as the external communications and
Correct.
the whole human factor that's involved. It's really interesting stuff. I mean, you seem very excited about this. It seems to be growing quite a bit right now. What are some of the things that you're most excited about that you wanted to talk about, you know, with your clients, and as well as with these programs that you're developing?
Well, I think for me, it's in 2012, I didn't think security was a cool career necessarily. I knew it was something that had touched various points of my career to date, but I didn't realize that there was actually an element of opportunity for me myself in this space. And once I discovered that, I became very excited about the potential for other women. And also women that have not even entered into careers yet, that are still actually studying at school or studying at university and deciding what could they potentially do. They're interested in the tech space, but they're not sure what a career in cybersecurity would even look like. And so what I'm excited about is where we're at right now. Cybersecurity is cool. I think that we definitely need, there's a bit of a call to action here. We definitely need more women in this industry. And how do we make it an exciting career for them?
We have a little bit of a PR crisis ourselves in cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do we communicate that? Show a curiosity. If you're interested in this, it's not a traditional path. You can do a non-traditional path. There are opportunities. Companies are dealing with a skills shortage, period, in this space right now.
That's true.
And so there is a great opportunity for women to enter into careers in cybersecurity. We have a number of phenomenal women at Microsoft who I think are great role models for those of us that are actually building our careers in cyber. So we have various different roles. We have sales roles. We have a wonderful woman who's our CVP, Ann Johnson, who heads up our cybersecurity solutions group. We also have wonderful engineers. Hayden Hainsworth heads up a engineering group that's actually looking at how do we engineer products for customers and partners. So actually gets feedback from customers and partners to put into the engineering cycle. So it's not just the historical, if you want to follow a career in security, you have to be an engineer or you have to market our products.
Gotcha. Well, that's really good to know because I think that there's a misrepresentation out there.
Correct.
That's generated by the media and perpetuated about there's only 11% of the workforce is female. We do see that may or may not be true because some of these studies were done, that excluded women in cyber who were communicators, marketers,
correct,
things that weren't necessarily programmers. So that's great that you were talking about that. We definitely have an interesting Women in Cyber series going with Cybercrime magazine, and we'd love to have you talk about that some more. So aside from the Women in Cyber, what's new for you in 2019 when it comes to communicating more about the cybersecurity strategies that you're putting in place?
Well, I think it's about how can we scale some of this across our global partner network, and our partners can therefore help our customers too. The reality is all of our customers are wanting to digitally transform, and everybody's looking at AI and how AI can help them in their business.
The hot new thing, Tracey.
Absolutely, it's the bright shiny object. And I think the digital transformation process in some cases is scary for some customers because they are worried about cybersecurity. And it's how do we actually tell the good side of the strategy story here so that they can understand that there is actually a path forward and that they don't have to be as concerned as they may think they need to be concerned.
So what can we do to find out some more information about you and what you're doing with Microsoft when it comes to this?
I would love to keep the conversation going and also help introduce the broader community. I think there are a number of women in Microsoft and men too that are driving some phenomenal programs, and how we bring those together. There's a lot of stuff happening, and sometimes how you bring that together in a digestible format for people to be able to easily access is critical. So the programmatic stuff exists today, and people will hear about it via news, but it's more around how can we bring it to community and bring it to them and help our partners scale that message for us too.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone who uses Microsoft products or a CEO is listening and they want to get more information, they want to get in touch with you, or they want to read more about what you're up to, where should they go?
There are a number of websites to go to within Microsoft, and I can certainly provide you with a link to those.
We definitely will.
We should, because
we'll
it
put
depends.
those in the editorial that
would
we
be
publish.
super. That would be super because it isn't a one size fits all. It depends if it's a partner that's particularly interested in security. Then we have the partner website. If it's specific products, or if it's cloud strategy, or if it's something else, and so there are various things. We're very blessed with a plethora of opportunities, and I'd love to just distill that in a way in which people can find what they're looking for.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for coming in today, Tracy.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.